Somebody called the police. There's been a murder on the dance floor. Or has there? Have we finally found the JBL Boombox 2 killer? We've been searching for it everywhere, and would be ironic if the day the JBL was murdered was just before they came out with the Boombox 3, which murdered the Boombox 2 anyway. But however, I'm saying it's murdered the Boombox 2. We've not even tested it. I may be just kidding you. What is the real difference between these two speakers? However, if there's any budget, sort of similar form factor, because in terms of weight, 5.5 kilos, just under 6 kilos, they are, although that looks a hell of a lot chunkier, trust me, there's a lot of weight in the Stormbox Blast. That's a heavy speaker. In terms of weight, not much between them. But hey, a lot between them in terms of potential prices at the moment, and these normally come down over time, about $200, 160 quid, $500, 450 quid. So we're talking, again, maybe a third of the price potentially. For obviously, you're going to get deals and whatever, and discount codes which are floating around already for the Tribit and the Tribit, whatever you want to call it. Can it get close at a third? We thought the Motion Boom Plus may be the one, but it wasn't the one. It was just another one. But this is the real one. What we're talking about? Well, I've already said, you've probably never seen me before, but I hope you have, and you'll know that I've stopped talking about watts. What? Yeah, watts. Because it's meaningless. They don't tell us what they're measuring, and it's just become a laugh, especially with JBL. You can read 160 watts or 80 watts for the very same speaker from the very same company. It's meaningless. But however, I will tell you the number. I'm just going to call them numbers. I'm not going to call them power ratings anymore. 90W versus 80W is what they say. So they're trying to say 90 watt speaker, 80 watt. There's so much more to it. We don't really know what they mean anymore. So we're just going to ignore it. We're just going to do the maximum volume test, which is all we need to know. Anyway, it's not like you can take the watts out on their own and say, look at my watts. It's just, you only know the watt. We might as well say it's 200 watt. And then you can tell your mate, I've got a 200 watt speaker. And they'll believe you, because how would they know any different? So similar weight, similar ratings in terms of power. In terms of those drivers, again, almost as though Tribit have taken aim at the JBL Boombox. Do you know why? Because 107mm woofers is the same size for both speakers. 107mm woofers, 20mm tweeters on the Boombox 2, and I measured 30mm on the Blast. But I'm doing it through the grill. It may be a little bit out, but it appears to be bigger tweeters. And even in terms of surface area, very, very similar. In fact, we've got more surface area for the drivers, if my tweeter rating is right, for the Stormbox Blast. So this is the one. This is the potential Boombox killer, and we can finally afford our very own JBL Boombox-like speaker. We'll start at low volumes, about 35%, which is 35% on both speakers.
Looking back, they're in the sand. Those were the best times that we ever had. Memories on replay from all of those days. Do you think about them? Oh, tell me, do you? Oh, feel like I do. Oh, wish that things were different and time didn't go slipping. Oh, tell me, do you feel the same like I do?
So even at these very low volumes, the Boombox 2 is showing what the difference will be between these two speakers. It's just got a much bigger, deeper bass. About 75 Hz and down. It's advantage to Boombox 2. It's also stronger in the mids And then the big difference is 2 kilohertz to 6 kilohertz. We're dipping on the Boombox 2 and we're wavy on the Stormbox Blast. We're peaking there at 2.5 kilohertz and then we're way down at 5.5 kilohertz and then we're back up by 7.5 kilohertz. And then the highs very much similar. So we are overall bass, we are 2 decibels up on the Boombox 2. We're 3 decibels up by 40 hertz. Mid bass, they are about the same. Overall mid bass about the same, but advantage in upper bass to the Blast, and of course deep bass to the Boombox 2.
In measurements, both these speakers have issues. On the Blast, it's that big dip, 3.5 kilohertz to 6 kilohertz, and on the Boombox 2, there's a wider but shallower dip, 2 to 6 kilohertz. But at the end of the day, it's how does it sound to your ears, which do the smoothing anyway, and all the different frequencies getting mixed up. Personally, as I said in my first video, doesn't really come over as being a major issue on the Blast, whereas I kind of hear it more as an issue on the Boombox 2, where it's robbed of some sparkle, of some detail, comes over as sounding a bit darker. The Blast does come over as sounding a bit clearer, a bit tighter, but the big difference here, oh no, oh don't say it, oh don't say it, I'm going to say it, it's deeper bass on the Boombox 2. It's not dead. It's not even been fatally injured. In fact, it's not injured at all. It's laughing now because you thought, oh, there's nothing special about me and anyone can do the same bass, but no. Even though they've done a good job on the Blast, 3 decibels down, which isn't huge, but it's still, well, 3 decibels is huge, but don't get, we're a bit rolled off now. But compared to the other speakers that we've done against the Boombox 2, that's pretty close. 3 decibels at 40 hertz. Overall deep bass, that is a big advantage. We're talking nearer 4 decibels in the overall deep bass. Same for mid bass on these 2 speakers, and then the advantage to the upper bass for the Blast. And there's the difference. A bit more in the deeper bass, a bit more in the upper bass. But overall, it's holding its own for bass. It's just, it's so close. But now, if we want the deep bass, we still got to pay the money. And get the bigger speaker. So I'm saying it's robbed of detail, lacks sparkle, but it's such a lovely deep bass that underpins everything, that still makes it enjoyable. But yeah, you're not going to, again, maybe this is a bit more musical. You're not going to do delicate listening again on the Boombox 2. Too much lacking in terms of detail. This is a boombox. The clue was in the name, it's a boombox. Whereas you can have a real Blast with a Blast. I think it's more of an all-rounder, even though there's you can measure the issues in the frequency response, but in actual listening, it's not too bad. I would say it was a matter of taste now, which one you prefer. But hey ho, that is low-level listening. That's not why you buy a Boombox 2. It's either to wake up your mate is in the next room, or it's to get thrown out of your boarding house or something, or the hotel, or it's to have a party, have some fun. You want to crank up the volume, the dial. In the old days, we had dials and we had volume controls and all that. Well, not if you're an audiophile, you wouldn't have volume. If you had a speaker with tone controls, the audiophiles, even before they had the forums that talk to each other, they'd come and slaughter you. You can't put anything in the path of the signal. But anyway, we moved on a little bit. Although I'm coming under a bit more of an attack now from these self-proclaimed audiophiles. I'm loving it. It's a sign that my channel's growing. So, about 70% volume. But hey ho, it goes a bit louder on the Blast. 70%, 75%.
This love is ill. I wish that it was different. Don't know what it is that made us so indifferent. We're drifting in the dark. Can we do better? Wish I could rewind back to the start. Can we do better than this? Better. Wish I could rewind back to the start. Can we do better than this? Better. We're drifting in the dark. Can we do better? Wish I could rewind back to the start. Can we do better than this? Better. You got me high and dry love. You got that something I can seem to let go.
At these decent listening volumes, overall bass is actually advantage to Stormbox Blast. What it can't do is match the deep bass here on the Boombox 2, 65 Hz and down. It's advantage to the Boombox 2, but the difference now, even down to the 40 Hz mark, is only a couple of decibels. The Boombox 2 is stronger in terms of the mids, but then we're dipping 2.5 kHz on the Boombox 2, but an even bigger dip, 5.5 kHz, of course, on the Stormbox Blast.
Do you know what? That's actually pretty close, isn't it? That's good news for people who want to save some money on their boombox. In fact, you could buy two of these, hook them up in stereo. It costs you less than a single JBL Boombox 2. It still is advantage now in the deep bass, but that's where the advantage is for the Boombox 2. You can measure the Boombox 2 as being stronger in the mids and the highs, but I have to say, because of the issues in the frequency response, whether it's just my Boombox 2 or all Boomboxes, I don't know. But this actually comes over as being a bit more detailed and a bit clearer, even though the measurements don't say that. And because of where those peaks and dips are, it's always going to sound a bit like a bit of a veil over it. It's still fun and everything, and it doesn't really take away from what that speaker is. But in terms of multi-genre, all-round, just having a listen to your music, I think this is the more musical of the speaker. But what it doesn't do, and that's what the Boombox 2 is all about. And if you're going to kill the Boombox 2, you have to match, at the minimum, its deep bass. We can't do that, but hey, we're pretty close, within 2 decibels. So we're almost at the point where you could say it's a JBL Boombox killer, and for a lot of people, that will be close enough. However, it didn't kill it, and it hasn't got the deep bass of the Boombox 2. And it's a bit of a draw because there are different reasons to buy. If it's still about deep bass, you have to get the Boombox 2. We don't have to. I'm not forcing you to. It's up to you, but it's still your best option. But if you want something that's more of an all-rounder and just sounds a bit more detailed when just listening to music, I think it's going to be the Blast. So, maximum volume. Is that going to be make or break for either of these speakers?
Try to paint me like a no-name. So sorry, but we're not the same. No, we're not the same. Boo-hoo, poor you. Please forgive me, cause I don't feel any pity. I'm fed up with lies. You wanted my demise. Now you're watching me rise, rise, rise. Up in the window. Smaller and smaller, you fade out. Up, up, up in the window. You cannot get my vibe, no, there's no way. I'm flying high above all your gravity, trying to bring me down, but I'll never stay. Hey, hey, watch me levitate. You cannot get my vibe, no, there's no way. You can say what you want, call me insane, trying to bring me down, but I'll never stay. Hey, hey, watch me levitate. Watch me levitate. Hey, hey, watch me levitate. In the window. In the window. In the window. In the window.
Watch me levitate, watch me levitate, watch me levitate, watch me levitate, levitate. Watch me levitate, watch me levitate, watch me levitate, watch me levitate.
Watch me levitate. You cannot get my vibe, no, there's no way. I'm flying high above all your gravity, trying to bring me down, but I'll never stay. Hey, hey, watch me levitate. You cannot get my vibe, no, there's no way. You can say what you want, call me insane, trying to bring me down, but I'll never stay. Hey, hey, watch me levitate. Watch me levitate.
terms of sheer loudness, the Tribit Stormbox Blast with X-Bass off is actually the loudest, but with X-Bass on, you get more bass, the blue line there, at the cost of some upper bass and the mids. And it may be the quietest now, the JBL Boombox 2, but it still dominates. It's still the king of the deep bass. Nearly 4 decibels louder in overall deep bass, 5 decibels up at 40 Hz. And compared to the Stormbox Blast, it has recessed highs, but really, its highs are more in line with the original track. And we've got this peak 2.5 kHz on the Stormbox Blast, which doesn't sound very nice to listen to, but it does give us a lot more in terms of volume. And it's peaking at exactly the same place as the JBL Boombox has a dip. And again, a big peak around the 8 kHz mark, and the big dip in between those peaks at 8 kHz and around the 4 kHz mark. But in terms of the upper bass, the Stormbox Blast does dominate, and it's just the deep bass, along with a smoother sound being offered by the JBL Boombox 2. In terms of X-Bass on, X-Bass off, as you can see, you turn X-Bass off when you're at maximum volume, you're going to get a little bit more in terms of the volume. You're going to get a bit of a boost in the upper bass, and it's at the cost of deeper bass, 65 Hz and down, which you'll only get if you leave X-Bass on. Difference isn't huge, about 1/3 of a decibel, but it's nearly 2 decibels advantage to X-Bass off in terms of upper bass, and then flip-flop a couple of decibels to advantage of X-Bass on for the deeper bass.
Both of these speakers will go louder when hooked up to the mains. About a decibel overall for both of them, but maybe a bit more loudness that you'll hear to your ear with the Boombox 2 plugged in. You'll get a bit more in the bass at maximum volume if you plug your mains lead in to the Blast. However, on battery, between the two of them, about 3 decibels. That's quite a lot on paper between the Blast and the Boombox 2, but that's not the story. The story is going that much louder because of a narrow peak. That 2 to 4 kHz peak I'm personally getting when I'm using real-world tracks, but I'm not getting when I'm doing frequency response measurements. 70 Hz and down, it's the Boombox 2. It's about bass, and that's what you get, but you're not getting anything else now at maximum volume. It's very dark. It's just that bass. With the Blast, we're still getting some bass, but the balance is towards the highs. It is a bit screechy and a bit nasty to my ears. Again, it's a hard choice. More volume, more deep bass, but then no detail at all. Again, something in between would have been perfect. But you've got options. The Stormbox Blast does deliver. Let's see where that price ends up. I think it's already like $150, isn't it? With Flossie Carter's, I don't know if it's a vanity code or actually Tribit's code, but anyway, with the code that's floating about, but I think you'll be hard pressed to get it without a discount anyway. So, specs time. We'll go over the specs. I went over everything in the first video. Just know these lights will tell you where you are in the volume. That's quite nice. I do like the way. I think they actually work. They work in sync with the music. It's got all the controls for the lights on the speaker itself. X-Bass on. I've done all the testing with X-Bass on. Remember, X-Bass off, it will go a little bit louder, but with a little bit less bass by the time you hit maximum volume. But at all other volume steps, just below near maximum volume, it's louder with X-Bass on. Not just because of the bass, but because it's actually going louder all along the frequency response. So making it sound a bit more of a difference than it really is. But X-Bass on does extend the bass. X-Bass off, still a decent bass, but it's upper bass oriented. Whereas if you put X-Bass on, the bass is boosted everywhere, but it's extended now. So it roll off from about just under 60 Hz, whereas the roll off is from about 80 Hz with X-Bass off. You have to use a mains lead to charge this. That's maybe one of the few downsides. Oh, it's the end of love on my channel. We're going to have to do something about that, aren't we? We can't have the end of love. We're back in love. So, the overall specs. We know the Boombox 3 is about to come out, but hey ho, we can only do it against the Boombox 2 for now. By the way, I don't expect JBL to supply me with the Boombox 3 because they screwed me over with the Boombox 2. I took about 20 emails asking if I could get a hold of a Boombox 2. And I just said, just let me know one way or the other. They said, well, it's hard. We'll see if we can find one spare, because I never heard from them again. I hope I get to be a Flossy Cart-sized channel and that JBL can come and say, oh, all right, Al, I'm quite like it now. Can you listen? No. Do you remember when I was a little channel and you didn't even want to reply to my emails? Wouldn't it be brilliant if we could get one up on JBL? Who sent me a soundbar once, if you want to know why, they thought I was someone else. But hey-ho, if you get your house in order, JBL, that wouldn't have happened.
JBL! Yeah, I love JBL.
So, in terms of batteries, 71 watt hours versus 72 watt hours. Almost identical in size of battery, almost identical in size of weight. In size of weight, in weight terms, and of course the size of the speakers. Both only SBC codecs, 5.1 Bluetooth versus 5.3 on the Stormbox Blast. Party mode as well as TWS on the Boombox 2. It's only TWS on the Stormbox Blast. Both have auxiliary in. Both can be used as a power bank. Only the Stormbox Blast has the lights. Amazingly, for the size of speakers, they both float, and if you do funny things with the handle, they will both float with the drivers up. Measured a little bit more in terms of latency, 33 milliseconds versus 0 plus or minus 17 milliseconds for the Blast, but both quite good. But if you really want zero latency, found the Blast a little bit better. Terrible for Bluetooth latency, really. 140 milliseconds for what you pay for the speaker of the Boombox 2. Awful. Whereas 83 milliseconds just creeps in as acceptable. They both have an app, but only Tribit will let you mess around with the EQ. I haven't done that yet. I will one day when I get space in my life. But it's not terrible in its tuning anyway. It wasn't like the Boom Plus, where you immediately had to go to custom because it sounded, to my ears, not good at all, quite harsh. And I get this. It's been enjoyable out of the box, even before any burn-in at all, whether or not you think that's real. So that's the roundup. Is it a Boombox 2 killer? No, but it's giving it a good kicking, to be fair. It does a lot of things right. It's more of an all-rounder, I would say, than the Boombox 2. Just know it weighs the same. It's a hefty old speaker. It's got the lights you haven't got on the Boombox 2, but it can't do the very deep bass that the Boombox 2 does, which is the reason to get the Boombox 2, the deep bass in that size of speaker. Of course, as the speakers go up in size and more powerful, they're going to do deep. Doesn't matter what speaker I've reviewed, listened to. Someone will come up, well, this speaker is a bigger, yes, and those speakers you tell me have bigger bass are always more expensive. They're always bigger, and with bigger drivers, etc., etc. Of course, if you just find something, but you'll always be able to find something bigger. It's like, it doesn't matter how good you are at martial arts, it doesn't matter with your Mike Tyson, there's always someone out there who's going to beat you in a fight. So just remember, if you're going to come on and tell me another speaker is going to have more bass, it needs to be similar. We're comparing speakers. Otherwise, it doesn't really mean a lot to me and most of my subscribers. So there you go. I hope you got the info you needed from this comparison. We now wait on the Boombox 3, which I'm sure will be a Boombox 2 killer. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more of the Stormbox Blast, especially once I've had a chance to see what the EQ can do. There are issues there that you can measure that we can do, but don't seem to be a major issue when you're actually listening to the speaker. Of course, if you're a trained ear and you're listening to real instruments and acoustics and stuff like that, that's not very complex, you'll hear more of those issues. But for the sort of tracks that I predict you'll be listening to on this, it's not a major issue. Your ears are going to smooth over a lot of that anyway, because all the frequencies are playing at the same time. So that's the end of this particular video. I hope to see you in another video, and take care of yourself.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.